Welcome, everyone. This is a special meeting of the Government Transition Advisory Committee. It's special in as much as it is sort of outside of our regular meeting schedule, and attendance for members is optional. Today is Friday, May 10th. Can everyone make sure to mute yourself? Thanks. Today's Friday, May 10th, and we will be here from 12 to 1. My name is Julia Meyer. I use she, her pronouns, and I am the Engagement and Community Participation Manager for the transition. Our new co-chair, Amy, is going to facilitate today's meeting. These slides are out of order. The next slide should be meeting logistics. I'm just going to take a moment to go over some meeting logistics before we get started. This is a virtual meeting. The meeting is being recorded for later viewing and live streamed on our YouTube channel. A copy of the recording will be posted on the city's transition webpage under past meetings and events. For today's meeting, we have closed captioning available. To access closed captioning, you can click on the CC button on the bottom of your screen. For committee members, please take this moment to change your chat settings to everyone so that folks in attendance can view the chat. And please remember that the chat is part of the public meeting record. For community members listening in, we have the Zoom Q&A feature available. You can submit questions or comments through the Q&A function. We may not always live answer all the questions, but we read them and they do become part of the public meeting record. At today's meeting, we're not taking verbal public comment, but you can sign up now to give public comment at our next GTAC meeting, which is Wednesday, May 15th, or you can submit written public comment at any time through our online comment form by calling 311 or by emailing us at transition@portlandoregon.gov. Next slide, and I'll turn it over to Amy to introduce the agenda. Thanks.
Hi, everybody. So today we're going to be welcoming Juan Carlos to talk about the evaluation project. That'll be the majority of the meeting. And to just take a second to frame this meeting for us, today's meeting is a follow-up to the April 9th discussion we had about the evaluation of the transition process. Broadly, we as GTAC are talking about the transition evaluation because the GTAC work plan includes the following: advise on outcome and impact metrics to measure the transition, including how to collect data. So we're here mostly in an advisory role. We're one of many inputs on this topic, and we're just here to offer our feedback. At the April 9th meeting, staff presented the draft evaluation and asked GTAC for feedback, and we provided feedback to the draft evaluation plan. At this meeting, at the April 9th meeting, co-chairs requested a follow-up meeting to that discussion, and then this is that meeting. Staff revised the evaluation plan based on GTAC's feedback from April 9th and drafted new questions where they want GTAC's feedback, and these are the questions that we'll discuss today. 1 week after this meeting, this 5-10 meeting, staff wants to finalize the performance stories and move to data collection. Generally, we're here to offer mostly ideas and feedback, but if there's something that we feel like we need to make a formal recommendation, for example, XYZ in this needs budget or some sort of formal recommendation, then we would move to motion. Otherwise, we're mostly just offering feedback and ideas. Otherwise, we're simply participating as stakeholders. Next slide. So I want to hand it over to Juan Carlos.
Good afternoon.
We have Juan Carlos with us again today to share how they revised the plan based on our feedback. And these were the things that were that came from our April 9th meeting. So next slide, please. And I want to hand it over to you, Juan Carlos.
Chair Rendell and members of the Government Transition Advisory Committee who are here today. My name is Juan Carlos Ocaña Chiu, he, him pronouns. I am the Racial Equity Program Manager for OMF, the Office of Management and Finance, and I am also a member of the transition team. And one of my assignments as part of the team has been to lead the evaluation component of the transition. So it's great to be here again and to have this opportunity to continue the conversation from April 9th. As co-chair Rendell and Julia mentioned, there has been a lot of work since that conversation that we had. And I also want to thank you again for all the input and feedback and ideas that you all brought up to that conversation. And they were very helpful. And as a result of that, we made a number of changes and expanded the document that you received originally in order to add more detail that this committee wanted to see, and also to answer a number of the questions that the committee members brought up on April 9th. And the best place to answer those questions was that document that you should have received a week ago. So the revised performance stories that you see there on this slide are primarily are basically the same, except for story number 5, in which we heard your comments and suggestions clearly, and I took one of them and put it there as kind of as an example of what it would look like. There are a few other alternatives that you could see in the expanded document that could also be developed into the full logic model of the performance story. So the one performance story from the suggestions that you brought up, the one that I chose to put there is stakeholders believe the charter changes and the structural and policy changes have been implemented effectively by the transition team. So the other potential stories that you brought up on April 9th, if you, as you will remember, are or include to evaluate the success of change management in bringing 28 bureaus into 6 service areas that are poised for future improvements. Another one is to evaluate the engagement and lessons learned to move forward better. And the third option that we heard on April 9th was to evaluate stakeholders' understanding of how to engage with the new structures that have been implemented. So those are the possibilities, and one of the questions that I would like to ask for your consideration today. Next slide, please. So I will cut to the chase, if you will, and ask and bring these questions. And after that, I'd like to have the conversation, which in my experience is the richest part of this, of having you all collectively together here to ask questions, to address the questions that I had drafted here for you, and also to answer, for me to answer any other questions that you may have regarding the document and the performance stories, the methodology, any aspects of that. So again, to walk you through these questions, there's 3 sets of questions. The first one is, what are the lingering questions that do you have after reviewing the updated performance stories draft? So that conversation that I mentioned. And are there any suggestions that were not incorporated that you want to discuss? The second set is what questions or suggestions do you have about Performance Story 3? The Charter Transition Project is delivered on budget. There were there were voices that wanted to keep that story as it was, so we kept it there, but maybe with the additional detail that you have received, you may have additional suggestions or questions about that performance story, so we wanted to have the opportunity to talk about that. And the third set of questions is about Performance Story 5. What questions or suggestions do you have about this performance story? The one that I chose as the example, and also about the three other ones in the document that I did not choose to elevate as the example. And the second question for you there is, how do you want to be in the next steps of the transition evaluation? So next slide, please. Actually, that's the next steps slide. So maybe we'll go back to the previous slide. Thank you, June. So yeah, so I wanted to start with those questions, and I will be happy to refer to the document that you received to answer any of those questions. I would ask maybe June, or I can do that myself, to share that document if that will be on the screen, if that will be of interest to you. And yeah, just would like to open that up for your consideration. What questions do you have after reviewing the updated performance stories draft? And yeah,
one note on timing, just to make sure we have, we make sure we've got enough time to talk about all these questions.
Yes.
We'll have about 10 minutes for 10 to 12-ish minutes for each set of questions. And that'll leave us a little bit of time at the end to talk about next steps and answer questions. So we'll just start now with the first set. So what lingering questions do you all have after reviewing the updated performance stories? And are there any suggestions that are not incorporated that you want to discuss? Okay, so we'll just start. If folks can put their hands up so we can figure out about how many people, so we can time out. Okay, so I've got 3 now. So maybe about a minute and a half, just to allow time. And if there's more time, we can circle back. Let's go Juanita, Bill, and Destiny.
Thank you. Yes, the first question is, now just during the presentation, my question was answered in terms of that this is the process that the transition team is using to collect the data that will be then used to do the report by a Smart City PDX. Is that correct? Yes, no will be fine. Yes, okay. If that's the case, if it is yes, my concern is that if these questions for or stories that there are going to be questions about to the community stakeholders, then it doesn't seem to me that they will be really qualitative, and I know that there is stated in the report that the city cannot afford to do a qualitative and a quantitative evaluation. But I think that just by changing these questions in a way, I think that quantitative data can be collected. For example, there's used a lot throughout the document. Portlanders feel, for example, one of the points it says on question number 4 or story number 4, Portlanders feel the city has provided them with clear, accurate, and timely communications about the transition to the new form of government. How do we evaluate the feeling? And then that was so it then data to be then utilized by PDX, Smart City PDX. I don't know what are they going to do with that, or what type of data is going to be, so that's my concern. The other piece is that
you're at a minute and a half, Juanita.
Yeah, to tell me when I'm done. Tell me when
I'll give you. We'll go to 2, but you have about 15 seconds.
Oh, okay, then, well, I will go, when we go to the next questions, I will then say the rest. Okay,
Okay.
thank you.
Bill, you're up.
The only
Thank
thing,
you.
the only thing I just need to, about this, they were not incorporated. There's no mention about the onboarding process at all throughout the document. That's all.
Go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, thank you, Amy. Juan Carlos, a question I have is how will you use or interconnect the different performance stories? I'm envisioning that you're not going to have 5 separate speeches, that there's going to be, a presentation, and then you're going to try to make the points in the various performance stories. But I might be wrong on that. So that's my question. How are you going to use or interconnect the performance stories? And thank you.
One question, Co-Chair Rendell. Do you want me to respond to
Yeah.
the questions
you can
as they
respond.
come, or do you want me to wait? And also
Maybe take them as
question-
they come. Yeah, you're pretty much on this hot seat here, so your response
Yeah,
is
thank
kind
you.
of the
I
response.
would
will take
prefer
a lot
that
of time,
too,
yeah.
and I also will ask if I miss any of your questions, please remind me, because I don't have a good setup right now, so it's hard for me to type. So I'll go then, if possible, to the question that Juanita brought up. So yes, the process that you, as you sketched it, is mostly correct. Smart Cities PDX, their role in this project is to help create the questions. So the questions that, as you see there, they're in the logic model. There really are no questions. They're just a series of statements that flow logically. So what we're gonna do next, once we agree on these performance stories, I will be meeting with Smart Cities PDX and with the Office of Equity and working with them to do another review of these stories, and then identifying the actual questions and data points, the things that we're going to measure, that then we're going to go out to the community and ask. So the work that they'll be doing is helping translate this into the appropriate questions with the appropriate measurements in order to then be able to say in a convincing way, yes, we accomplished these outcomes that we set out to accomplish, or no, we didn't. So that's the full picture of the next steps. In terms of the other question that Juanita brought about the reports, they will help us create a report. They will help us do the analysis of the questions, and then, but the authorship of the report, if you will be from the transition team, as I envision it right now. That may change. We may want to keep them as the third-party evaluator, if you will, although that's splitting hairs, but that's a little debatable because it's one branch of the city evaluating another branch of the city, which doesn't always look the greatest, but it's a possibility. So that's still under development. In terms of how to measure feeling, and the overall, first, in terms of the overall concern about qualitative data, I totally agree with you. I won't speak for my colleagues in the transition team, but we agree that it's a gap that we are experiencing now. That said, in order to really use the qualitative information better, we need more time. It's not just a question of resources, but we need time for people to experience the new form of government. We need time for people to go through the voting using the new voting method of ranked choice voting. We need people to see how the new city works with a legislative council and an executive mayor and a city administrator. So yes, they can provide, definitely, people could provide us with qualitative data about the implementation of those changes, and they will be useful. But I think we're keeping the eyes on our eyes on the bigger prize, if you will, which is the overall, the global impact of all these changes. And that's something that we could really convincingly say what the impact of those changes are once we have a track record of having those changes. So so that's the big picture. In terms of the other picture or the other question that Juanita asked is how do we measure feeling? How do we measure belief?
We need to move on to Bill's question now. Sorry.
Quickly, yes, we can do that with using scales. So do you feel strongly this way or this other way, and where do you fall in between? That's the practical way of measuring feeling. So for Bill's question, yeah, the performance stories are meant to stand alone and also can work together. So in terms of the report, it will be a narrative report in my mind, with a technical section about the numbers, the answers that people gave to the questions in that numeric fashion, in that scale, and we'll definitely be weaving them together in terms of how the implementation of the charter changes and the completion of this on time and on budget supported all the other changes, that supported the education efforts, which is where the onboarding comes, by the way. That's included in the education section of Performance Story 4. It's education not just to the community, but also education to our employees and education to the future elected officials. So that's included there. If that's missing, I will make sure it's included in there. So they will be interwoven. We'll tell the story of how all these pieces fit together. The budget, the completion, the changes, the administrative changes to support the charter changes that the voters approved, and ideally the last part of that story will be about how people feel in terms of some kind of global measure. If it is the one that's there currently as an example, great. If GTAC suggests a different performance story out of those options that were mentioned on April 9th, it's perfectly doable, and it's something that we can talk and hopefully reach an agreement on.
Okay. I'm going to renege what I said. We'll take the next 3 questions and then we'll answer them in a batch. So we've got Destiny, Julia, and then Leah.
Like my questions connect to what Juan just said, which is this evaluation, it doesn't, it stops by June 2025. And the goal of this, which Juan alluded to, is did we implement this new charter effectively? So using staff time and using that budget now to me seems redundant because we're not going to know. And so another part of this is that these performance stories are basically just markers the city wants to convince themselves they've done, but without qualitative and without actually experiencing it. I feel like these questions are yeah, of course you're going to do a city restructure. You don't need to spend money to know that of additional evaluation and all this redundancy, because you have to do that. These are just markers for the city to check mark all the natural things that have to happen. So I don't think that these should be answered before June 2025. If anything, it should be planned and implemented to start after that, using staff time and being budgeted and being allocated for that. And third of all, I think, one of the missing is that quality. The feelings of marker doesn't really say that. There's a lot of comments that have been implemented, a lot of things that people commented, but obviously city has since moved from. So capturing that data already would be influential after June 2025. And then there's no part of did GTAC think that the city did a good job implementing charter reform and what our thoughts are? And so again, you could capture that before June 2025, but I think the actual success is afterwards. Thank you.
Thanks, Destiny. Julia, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm actually playing the role of Fred, who left me a voice message this morning from the road. And he's sorry that he can't be here. And I didn't get to connect with him, so all I have is his voice mail. So I'll just say what he said to me, because I don't think it fits into any of these other sets of questions. It seems like he had 2 points. One, maybe this is related to Destiny's. He felt that these were sort of stories that told a good, I guess he assumes they'll all have positive outcomes to them. And so is it just kind of like a publicity thing for the city? I can't say anymore, I apologize. And then his second thing, and I'm not quite sure where this goes, but he said that I guess he wanted to know what, if any, external stakeholders, so non-city employees, were involved in the city organization work. And if none were, where, if at all, does that fit in to this evaluation? Thanks.
Okay, great. Thank you. And then Leah, I see your comment in the chat. Do you want to take a second and just say it verbally, or you feel satiated? Okay, so I'll just read your question aloud. Stakeholders are referenced in several stories. Who are the identified stakeholders for these stories? Are they the same or different? So Juan Carlos, we had, is this premature? Is this just publicity? What are the non-city employees? And Leah's question about stakeholders. We've got about 5 more minutes for this topic.
Thank you. Those are excellent questions, and definitely we're not approaching this as an exercise in just patting ourselves in the back and saying, yeah, we did it. No. The challenge again with this evaluation is that we really, in order to truly assess the impact and the success of these measures, we need more time. And I totally agree. As I said before, we ideally we would start with this, and that's what we're currently hoping for and pushing for to get on the budgets, is to start with this exercise, which has a lot of limitations, including that it's purely quantitative. And for a number of us, we need both. We need quantitative and qualitative that should be seamlessly integrated. So that's challenge number one. And we also need time to really assess and understand the true impact of the implementation of the charter reforms. That said, we committed to evaluating the transition. This team that I'm part of, we're responsible for the transition. We're not responsible for what happens after December 31st. I mean, the transition will continue the first 6 months, as I mentioned, of the new form of government, but it will be tapering off and until the new electeds and the staff that they bring on board take the reins of the implementation, of the continued implementation of all these changes. It's not, as you all know, it's not going to be a light switch flipping on and off on December 31st. This is the beginning, this is phase 1. So we still need to evaluate phase 1. And we had a lot of conversations internally, and we settled on this methodology in spite of those challenges, in spite of those shortcomings, because that is the methodology that it was readily available. It's being promoted by the city budget office. They're the ones who created this, and they're using it to evaluate other citywide projects. So it felt like the right level of evaluation and the right level of work that we could take on. Some of the stories are yes or ultimately are yes or no. Did it happen? Did these changes were implemented or not? Yeah, they are at that level, but that is really what's going to set up the rest. You know, if we fail to implement, if we fail to do some of those, then the whole effort will be incomplete. There are things that we are looking at in the performance stories that were not approved by the voters, but have been identified, like the restructuring of the city, the 6 service areas, the administrative structure under the city administrator. Those are all things that we as a transition team have been deeply involved in, and are, to the best of our knowledge, also really important to happen in order to support the charter changes. The charter changes on their own would need that level of infrastructure and support. So that's what we're focusing on. We're focusing on both. We're saying, yes, we did what the voters told us to do, what the voters mandated, yes or no. And then the rest is where the nuance comes. You know, how did we do this? How did we educate the community and city employees? How did we communicate? How did we engage people? How did we do with the budget? Did we go over a lot or not? So all those things are what we're trying to evaluate here through this process. So again, it may seem that way, and I think because of some of those structural limitations, it may look that way, but we're really seriously committed to taking a look at how are we doing this implementation? How are we doing what we control? We had a lot of conversations about that too, and about measuring the big impacts, and we came to the agreement that those impacts are out of our hands. You know, there were suggestions about evaluating things like, well, the composition of the future council in terms of race, ethnicity, income level, etc. And we had to accept that we're not responsible for that. We're responsible for implementing ranked choice voting. We're not responsible for recruiting candidates. We're responsible for making certain changes, and that's where our scope of the project ends, and that's what this evaluation is focused on. So I totally hear what your concerns. I can understand why it may look like a publicity stunt, but it's really an effort to evaluate what we as a transition team have is in our scope, and we have authority to implement. We cannot really evaluate more than that at this point. We feel like that is possible to do, and it should be done, but it would have to be done in a better setup project, better resource project that looks at both quantitative and qualitative, with the benefit of time, because again, the true impact of these changes won't be known for a few years.
Yeah, Juan Carlos, I just want to keep us on track time-wise. So we're at the end for these 2 questions. And Lori and Zach, is your question, well, I'll just move us forward into the next realm, and I've got Lori and Zach as the next 2 speakers. So let's take the next, I did these sets weird, but let's do, what questions or suggestions do you have about performance story 3? And then we'll take that as its own question, and then whatever comments you have, and then we'll move on. So that we'd spent about 20 minutes on that last discussion. I think let's spend about 10 to 15 minutes for this next question. Lori and Zach.
Sorry, I was trying to write mine in the chat. I don't have input on the second set of questions. So
No problem. You can still go ahead.
Oh, okay. I just wanted to quicken. I was reading the chat too, so I might be behind. I just wanted to, I guess, respectfully disagree with some of the concerns that were raised earlier, and echo what Juan Carlos is saying, that I think it is important that we do the work to evaluate what this transition team and what we are being held responsible for in this transition, and see that it came out effectively, on budget, and on time. And that's the information that we'll have at the end of this. And I think it is important to also evaluate whether these changes actually brought around what the Charter Commission wanted them to bring around, and that is not going to be available yet. And so I think I see them. I remember when we first started to talk about this, these 2 things were combined, and we were struggling with how do you measure this and which do we focus on? And I think it is really good policy to separate them because they really are two separate things. And I think both should be looked at. So that's all I want to say. Thanks.
Thanks, Julie. Lori. Zach, you see your hand is down now.
Yeah, I mean, I put it in the chat, but also just reiterating, I agree with Lori. I think we're ambitious and obviously invested in enough in wanting that to ensure that the impact that we're doing is like evaluated, and it's just like temporally we're not at that point. And I think it's important that we're really honing in on the kind of minutia of the implementation of the charter changes and the transition itself. I guess to try to be respectful of asking a question towards set 2, I'm curious about the trying to unpack the budget question as it pertains to like all of the kind of spin-off kind of indirect budgetary needs out of the transition. We had pretty substantial asks to expand small grants program, for example. Facilities was always kind of like spun as this was not really part of the transition as a conversation. And so I'm just kind of curious to what extent we're trying to, like, I worry that it's presumptive to say that we were on target and within a 5% range. And by having that as the target, we're going to improperly exclude elements of the actual transition itself. So I just saw it problematic to state that outright, that we were successful within that range.
Thank you. Carrie.
I think I agree with Zach, and just more specifically, I'm not sure we actually had a budget. We had some cost estimates that shifted as confidence got better, but I'm not sure that's staying on budget or that's just doing the best you can, and this is what it ended up being. I don't, those are, to me, kind of two different stories. And then there's the transition, and then there's like the cost of the new government, doing business in the new government. And those are two separate stories too. Some are related to the charter reforms, and like Zach said, some are collateral to the charter reforms that we're going to see more and more of. The neighborhood coalition stuff going into districts is going to have a whole new way of budgeting a bureau. And I don't know whether that's delivering the charter transition on budget, or is that just an additional cost that the charter transition caused? Or that's just the new doing business. So I don't know how you sort this out with one performance story. But anyway, those are just comments. You don't have to answer them now, but we'll answer them eventually.
Juanita, go ahead, and then Juan Carlos.
Really quick, yeah, just really quick. I understand the concern regarding that. This is the concerns with that Lori and Terry and Zach express, and I understand their point of view. However, I think that if the city is going to invest the time of the staff, and they're going to asking them, put them in the role of this pressure, it should be very easy to change some of the questions. And just an example that I gave to Bill is that instead of saying an example, they say the majority of the stakeholders believe that they did a good job. They could say 80% of the stakeholders' responses indicated that. You see it right there. Now, the concern that I have with not putting some type of measurement is that my experience, and I will speak only for myself, the experience that we have had throughout this process is that it has been very limited responses from the community and from stakeholders. I mean, when we have 56 people attending the presentations or whatever, I don't want to say numbers because I don't want to say them, give the wrong numbers. I don't have them all on my head, but when we have these various minuscule number of people participating, and then 5 respond, and then we say 100% of the people who responded, or whatever, or the majority of the 5, but we're not giving any sense about what is the majority. I mean, maybe 5. It was 5 out of the whole city of Portland. So that's the only reason why I wanted to comment on the concerns expressed, because I think that is the other side. This is already investing time of staff, and all it has to happen is just to change the way the questions are worded. Thank you.
Thanks, Juanita. Juan Carlos, you have about 4 minutes to respond to this set of questions, and then we'll move on to the last set there. I think you're muted. I think you're muted, Juan Carlos.
So
There-
sorry.
There you
I
go.
was saying that the concerns of that Terry and Zach brought up about budget is are spot on. You're absolutely correct about that. So we spent a lot of time as a team and with our budget analysts talking about what can we realistically measure? What do we do? So, and again, keeping in mind, what is the scope of this team? What is the scope of the transition? So where we landed in that I believe is the right approach is what we are responsible for really are what we're calling in I think in the story, and of course will have to be much better explained, what we're calling one-time costs. So the one-time cost of the transition team, of setting up this team of the FTE, mine and my colleagues who work on this project, the materials that we're using, the things like the facilities changes to City Hall expenses. Directly related to
Juan Carlos, you're cutting in and out. I can't hear you. That's not better.
Can you hear
No.
me? No?
Oh,
Maybe.
one more time.
I'm so sorry. Can you okay?
Oh, yeah. Maybe
No.
keep talking and see what we get.
Okay. Yeah, I can hear you. Maybe I'll hear you better here. So sorry. Issues.
Juan Carlos, I think it was better without the headphones.
Yeah.
Let me see something.
There you go.
Yeah, you sound okay right now.
Oh, okay, great.
Yeah, yeah.
I can't hear you very well, but
I spoke too soon. I'm so sorry, Juan Carlos. We cannot hear you again.
Let me check the audio settings to see if there's anything here.
Like you sound okay right now, and then like you get
Yeah.
Again,
Yeah.
sorry that I don't know if this is
If your throat permits, just yell at us.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Can you hear me okay?
No.
How about now?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, yes, we landed. Thank you for your patience. So we decided to focus on what we're calling one-time expenses, one-time costs of the transition, because that's really what our team is using. That's what our team has responsibility for. And yes, I hear you about all the other expenses that are being created as part of this transition. The what we're calling the ongoing expenses, the cost of the city administrator, the cost of the deputies, the cost of all the other parts of the infrastructure. And those are really outside of, we believe they're outside of the scope of the transition. Those are not necessarily the recommendations that the transition team made. Those have been decisions made ultimately by city council in terms of how, we propose a structure. I'm sure you all were there at the hearing, and council made changes to that structure. Council made additions, added more positions, added a lot of different things. So we feel, again, strongly that the ongoing costs are something that's outside of our direct jurisdiction, and that the best thing that we can do is to focus on the one-time expenses, the FTE, the materials that we're using, the consultants, the facilities, as I was saying, that definitely those are one-time costs to making City Hall and council chambers usable for this new council mayor form of government. And we felt like what's in the public consciousness, what we're going to be held accountable for and responsible for, is a figure that we don't like, but it's out there, which is what was in the voters pamphlet, an estimate, as you correctly pointed out, that was made by the city budget office way before there was a lot of confidence in it. So that's why we're using that as the indicator. Did we go up, above, or below that? And figuring out that it refers to the one-time expenses. Like everything.
I want to jump in here that we need to move on to the next set of questions in order to finish time-wise.
Sure.
I'll let you finish your point, but then we'll just need to move on.
My last point is that, we need a full evaluation of the transition, and that should be done. That should look into all of the other ongoing expenses that the transition has created and will create. And also it should look at savings. It should look at the efficiencies. It should look at how will the city be more efficient? And again, that is a task for a much longer temporal window than the one we have.
Thank you. Okay, so we've got about 6 minutes to wrap up the last questions, and then we'll get the next steps from you, Juan Carlos, and then we'll wrap up the meeting. So our last set of questions is, what stakeholders and suggestions, what questions or suggestions do you have about Performance Story 5? Stakeholders believe in charter changes and structural and policy changes have been implemented effectively by the transition project team. And then it's kind of separate, but how do we want to be involved in the next steps of the transition evaluation? So Juanita, is your hand up from the previous hand or a new hand?
Oh, no, that's the previous hand.
Okay, so we got Terry, and then I have a comment on this too. I'll step out and comment as
What is it?
Yeah, I guess I don't understand, based on Juan Carlos's last comments, that this evaluation is narrow to the transition itself, not the policies adopted by the city council. I'm not sure that that where this question fits, if the structural and policy changes implemented effectively. I don't know how you measure that without thinking about the policy choices and structural choices that were made. So again, I think you're blurring these stories, and I understand that the accountability of the staff is narrowly is a narrower version of what the transition of government is. But if you want that narrow consideration on the budget, then you can't ask questions like this.
Yeah.
But I don't know, again, a comment, not really a question.
Thanks, Terry.
Yeah, thank you.
I'll add in my 2 cents about how do we want to be involved in the next step of this transition evaluation. My preference, and I think like a preference that's forming in me generally, is that we be involved in a written form, but not necessarily in these discussion forums. I'm not sure that like we as GTAC bring that much in these discussion forums, different than if we just were giving written comments. So that's just my own personal opinion. Like, how can we as a committee kind of streamline and get ourselves out of the business of extensive comment where an email could do? Okay, Leah, go ahead.
Thank you. I'll be quick with this. One thing I was thinking as we're talking that might be useful to all of us is if the city is able to pull together a list of all of the various different evaluations that are going to be happening, because I think it might be helpful to guide us in terms of what the purpose of this one is in the ecosystem of all of the rest of them. Like, you know, I can speak for county elections and that there's one happening here too. I know there are various community groups that are also putting them out. I wouldn't be surprised if it's also happening in other places throughout the city organization. And I think knowing what other places are evaluating and how this is going to feed in will allow us to better offer input in this specific one. Thank you.
I love that suggestion. Destiny, you've got about 1 more minute and then we'll transition over to you, Juan Carlos, for your kind of closing thoughts, next steps, and then close it out. Go ahead.
Love Leah's comment and then also Terry and Lori's comments. I think we should evaluate how we have done and the transition has done, but it is narrowed. And so I'm wondering if there's a way that we could provide our own feedback on there, not to be censored by like the evaluation parameters, but somewhere in there so that we could capture those nuanced conversations or those nuanced parts that within our timeline we can. And then also, again, just like maybe put in a recommendation that these evaluations should continue officially. Like, I think that's an important part.
Thank you. Juan Carlos, we're at 53 right now. So if you could wrap it up and then we'll wrap up.
I can probably do the next steps in like 1 minute. So I'll if you are okay with that, I'll take a little longer than 2 minutes. First of all, to the question about what are the rest of evaluation efforts, I'm relatively new to the city, just a couple of years. I don't know who else evaluates, but so far the only place that seems to do like evaluation besides project by project, but like citywide, it's like the city budget office. They're the ones who are promoting this performance evaluation methodology, the performance stories. They are asking that of all the different budget requests and programs. So they're the only place that I know is taking this. Now, as members of the transition team, we all completely 100% agree with you. And that is a recommendation that we are making through our own channels of the current decision makers and the future decision makers, that they fund and resource and set up that what I call an impact evaluation that should include both quantitative and qualitative data integrated in a long temporal window to be able to truly evaluate all of the transition and the changes. So both this phase and also what happens 2 years from now, what happens 5 years from now, 10 years from now, what changes in Portlanders' lives as a result of this. And that again is way outside the scope of the transition project. And it's something that we are recommending, and hopefully the decision makers will hear that. We know we're in a constrained budget environment, but that would be the ideal scenario. And maybe the next council and mayor will be more receptive to this, ideally, hopefully. So yes to all that. Terry, thank you so much for your comment about the performance story 5. Yeah, we will look at the other performance stories, and that might be something, as co-chair Randall mentioned, where we would love your feedback about those other 3 options and which ones you feel that are more are better at capturing at evaluating something that's not already included in the other 4 performance stories. We don't have to have 5 performance stories either. It's something the methodology strongly recommends staying between 3 and 5. So again, we see this as an opportunity of expanding and drilling down into more of how people feel about the overall process. But if that story is not the right one in your opinion, if you want to look at the other 3 that are included in the document you saw, and you want to give us feedback, I would wholeheartedly welcome that. So please do so if you will. And I forget if there was a 3rd question or comment.
We got to throw it back to Julia in the next minute or so. So
okay.
Next
So next steps, we want to finish this in a week. So if you could send me the feedback, or to Julie, excuse me, I think Julie or June, and then they'll forward them to me. And these again, please remember, what's there are not the questions we will be asking. Those are not the questions. That's the logic model. That's the what we see, the flow from input to output to outcome. Now we need to work with those partners that you see there, Smart City, PDX, and Office of Equity, to develop the questions, to develop the surveys or other tools that we will be asking to get the information that will help us show whether we achieve those outcomes or not. So we'll be doing that, and Smart City, PDX, they're the experts on this. You know, I'm not somebody that does surveys for a living. It's not my I've been trained on a little bit of that, but it's not my main field. So I'll trust that they will help us with that. And then we'll circle back with you to show you what we put together, to get more feedback from you, and we'll do that in a written way. And we hope to start implementing the actual data collection in early July, and use other data that we have collected, I would say ancillary along the way. We ask, when we do staff forums, we ask polls, we ask people how they're feeling, what they know, how much they know. So we'll take all of that into consideration to help us flesh out this data. So I will stop there and turn it over to Julia, or to co-chair Randall.
Yeah, thank you so much for being with us today. Yeah, Julia, we'll turn it back to you to discuss next step.
Sure. If we go to the next slide, this is less, I think we just did next steps.
That's me.
To share upcoming meetings, just as a reminder for this month, kind of what we're doing. So Wednesday, this coming Wednesday is our next full GTAC meeting. It's going to be super fun. There are no staff presenting to you. It's just GTAC members sharing draft recommendations and discussing those and voting on which recommendations we want to send out to Portland for input this summer. And then the following week, the Districts and Council Operations Subcommittee meets on May 20th. The Budget Work Group meets on May 23rd. And then the Voter Education Subcommittee meets May 28th. And I think I'll just turn it back to Amy to adjourn us. It's good to see folks.
We're adjourned. Go enjoy the sunshine, everyone.